Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at Air Manual, and I'm joined by my co-founder and co-host, Paddy Mann. Hi there, Paddy.
Good morning. So, today we're going to help you to free up 15 hours of your time every week. We promised on our last episode we're going to get tactical, so this is where we do it. This challenge is something that we've been helping a lot of business owners and leaders with. Freeing up time is often the challenge that needs to be tackled before anything else can happen. I'm going to be quizzing Alexis on it, as to be honest, I'm a little less hands-on in this area of the business. It's Alexis and his team of awesome consultants who are on the ground delivering this time and time again. So, Alexis, my first question, what's the background story here? What led to you coming up with a way of freeing up so much time, and why is it so important anyway?
Yeah, so if I go way back, possibly to stories that I'm not sure that even you're that aware of, back when I was 13 years old, I was pretty entrepreneurial as a kid. I was setting up, I was doing things like washing cars, sweeping drives, creating newsletters and selling them, created a PlayStation fan site with banner advertising and so on. And what I found back then was that I could never scale those businesses. And that's why I kept on creating new one after new one, right? Like, they'd make a bit of money, I'd end up really busy, and then I couldn't work out how to extract myself and to grow the business. And so, I went to study management science at Loughborough University. Still didn't really feel like I got a good understanding of, how do I then build from nothing? And in fact, even back then, I was selling headsets and building computers and things like that, and still couldn't build a business around it. So I joined PA Consulting as a management consultant, which you do know about because that's we joined at the same time, but in different departments. And that was when I really started to see, like, this is how you run businesses at scale, because I was working then with companies like Honda and BP and AstraZeneca and UK government and so on. And I saw that they were using people and processes to enable them to deliver at scale, like, delivering everything that BP and Honda do is not reliant on one individual, where all my previous businesses were. And so seeing that was, when we then started the business together back in 2010, I could then see, like, over time, that's where we needed to get to. We needed to get to a point that we were both extracted from the business, or at least that we were identifying what works. So working out, what's the product, what's the approach to sell and market it and so on, and then hand that over to other people. And so I think that's something that I am almost embarrassed at how long it took me to kind of work that out. And it still didn't immediately give me we didn't then immediately start solving that in the first few years of the business. But I think that's such a key step for business owners to overcome, is getting to that point that you start to take what you've worked out works and start to scale it, to pass it over to people. And it doesn't have to be full-time employees immediately. It can be freelancers and part-time people. But that's where you really need to start, is getting things off your to-do list as the business owner, so that you can free up your time to work on the next product or work out a new marketing channel or whatever it is. So I think that's why this is so important, because if you can't do it, you never extract yourself from the business. You can't really scale it and grow.
Interesting. So we're taking it back from your entrepreneurial roots back when you were a teenager through to when you're creating your own business, working out how to do it for the first time. For the people listening, like, when will the tips, the steps that we're going to give them, when is it going to be appropriate for them to use? Is it just for business owners, or for all business leaders, or all managers, small companies, big companies? What's the scope of when this will work?
Yes, I think it happens in stages. So I'd say for those that are early stage, where perhaps it is just them at the moment, then the guidance that we're going to be talking about today is really about, like, how do you start taking those first steps to free up your time and hand things that are already working over to other people, so that you can work out the next thing, that you can find the next sales channel or improve your offer or find a marketing channel, do that. So right from early stage. But then also crucially, like what we tend to see, and we've experienced ourselves firsthand, is that as you grow and you add team members, different things start to free up your time. So early on, it's like sales and doing some marketing, and you are the salesperson typically when you're first starting a business. But over time, it becomes things like finance and HR and hiring and onboarding people and managing people. And then once you get to kind of like 10 people plus, you're kind of managing the system of business, you're managing the processes, you're trying to improve the issues between it. And actually, even then, when you get to very large businesses that we've both worked with as consultants, companies like Sony and IMI PLC and so on, like we've seen how those organizations are just ultimately made up of a series of other teams that have these sorts of problems. So you still end up with leaders that are stuck in the business, struggling to work on it because they're doing so much day to day. And so whatever stage you're in, the practice of identifying what you need to let go of and pass that on to other people so that you can create your time still applies.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, because on the one hand, you kind of go, we're taking inspiration from the bigger businesses because they appear to be doing so much right. So you go, well, okay, it's a small business problem. My dog's trying to get in. It's a small business problem, and one that you'll overcome and solve. And that's not really the case. If anything, it's a problem that gets scaled up, because whereas you've got one or two teams that you're trying to learn how to do it with in a small company, when you get to a big company, you've suddenly got hundreds, thousands of teams and multiple levels away from the leadership of the company, all trying to deal with this issue. And that's why you've got stressed out managers who are struggling to work out how to pass things down. So yeah, I'm guessing that the stuff that we're sharing today is going to be really relevant for business owners, but frankly, anyone who's responsible for leading or managing at any level of a business.
Yeah, indeed. I think, and particularly when we relate it back to stress, right? You know, like when you're talking about the source of stress, particularly as teams grow, it tends to be related to either feeling overwhelmed with how much needs to happen, or feeling like there's so much dependency on individuals that the stress comes from, oh, you know, if I'm not in the office next week, if I struggle to go on holiday or be sick or cope with a bereavement because I'm so required day to day, and I'm intrinsic to, I'm absolutely integral to every part of it. And so I think reducing that stress is key, particularly for larger teams, but frankly of any size.
Yeah, interesting. I'm spotting lots of it's going to, on the outside, it can feel like a simple challenge, but then there's so many little bits where people feel uncomfortable with different ways they can free up time, whether it's going to be possible. So we'll dig into those. But let's look at a high level. So what are the kind of high level steps that you would take a business owner or leader or manager that you're working with, who you can see is struggling to get time that they would otherwise be able to use for working on strategic initiatives, or finishing work on time, or not taking it away with them on holiday? What are those high level steps that you would be going through each time?
Yeah, so when you talk about that, like the first step has got to be prioritizing the areas to delegate, because often when people try and tackle this, they start too big. Like they feel like they've got to solve everything all at once, and that's not the case and becomes too overwhelming. Like I remember talking to a business owner of a printing company where he was working 60 hours per week, and he didn't even feel like he had enough time to work on the business to free up his time. And there was one particular process that he was doing where he was sending quotes to customers, and it was taking 3 hours per day, so 15 hours per week was being spent on that. And that's one of the reasons why this episode is called like Free Up 15 Hours, right? Because 15 hours spent on one process, one task that he had to do. And I remember him saying, look, I know, Alexis, I should document and delegate it. I know I'm meant to do that. But I figure it would take me 8 hours and I've just not found the time. And so I said, well, we've got 45 minutes left of this call. Let's see what we can do. And we documented the whole thing in under 45 minutes. And on a subsequent call, we handed it over to his account managers and his sales team. And that meant that from that point on, he'd freed up 3 hours per day, 15 hours per week. That's 780 hours over the course of the year. for investing a couple of hours, right? And so, but how did we do that? We prioritized. We identified one specific process that he could start by delegating. And of course, the opportunities to then do that for many other things that he's working on were huge. And by the way, nice little side benefit of that story is because not only did it free up time, but it improved conversion rates. Because of course, if you request a quote from 2 printing businesses and one comes back after 2 to 3 days because the owner had to do it, and one comes back within an hour because the account managers are doing it, like which one are you going to pick? And so he found like one of the biggest impacts was on that. So you've got to start by prioritizing the areas to delegate. Then once you've done that, ideally, you can perhaps identify a few areas, but even if it's just one task, identify what role should that be passed to. So in the example, it was, okay, I need to send quotes. That should be with an account manager, someone who's working with the customer because they're the ones that receive the request for the quote. Thirdly, you then need to capture the high-level steps and add detail only where needed. So commonly we see people who are trying to document processes and they just try and chuck everything in there, every screenshot, every piece of detail. And actually, you just need to start really high level. That's why we're able to do it in 45 minutes, is we start really high level and then add the detail only where needed to explain the logic or to deal with the tricky bits or whatever it is, which makes it a lot easier for someone to then follow and do the things. And then the fourth step is walk through it with the team members. That's what we did on that follow-up call with this business owner's account managers. And we tested and we iterated it. We got them to walk through it going, yeah, can they use this to do it for a real quote? And if they had any questions, we wouldn't just go, oh, business owner, you answer the question, and then account managers, you have to remember it. We'd update that guidance. We'd update the checklist with the answer to that question so that no one else had that question in future. And of course, we don't expect that that's it. It'll never need updating. We encourage and we empower the team to continue to update it based on their own questions. And so when you do that, you've now handed it over to them, and then you can start again from the beginning. Prioritize which areas to delegate next, identify roles to pass it to, capture the high-level steps and detail when needed, walk through the team members, test and iterate, and just repeat that process.
Excellent. So 4 steps: prioritize areas, identify roles, capture the high-level steps, only adding detail where needed, and walk it through with the team members and testing and iterating.
Yeah.
Where does it go wrong most commonly? Like particularly if you were to take a step back and leave people to their own devices, where does this fall over?
Yeah, so I've mentioned one already, which is trying to start off too big, thinking, oh, I need to document everything I'm doing. And then the temptation is like literally, I remember doing this. I remember it vividly. I was on a holiday in Dubai, sat on a balcony and on an early morning when my wife and kids are asleep, thinking, right, I need to get some of this work handed over to my team because I'm having to do some stuff while I'm on holiday because I'm blocking the team. And so I remember documenting loads and loads of processes around subscriptions and all sorts of different areas, and then trying to hand them all over in one go. And as a result, A, it took me a long time. B, when I then did hand it over, I realized I'd overcomplicated everything and it was hard to follow and so on. And so, but then it was hard to iterate on, right? Because I'd done so much, and for them, it was hard for them to take on. And so it wasn't really until we ended up then breaking that down and turning it in simple checklists, like we do in Air Manual, to like make it easy for them to follow. Because initially I'd done it in like PowerPoint with boxes and so on. So the first thing is start with just a few areas of where it's going to be high impact. The second mistake that I most commonly see is overcomplicating it, like I was doing by creating these. I had a PowerPoint document that provided the visual diagram of how all these bits come together, and then each of the boxes related to a separate document that gave the guidance, and then each of those has got loads and loads of detail. And actually, it's so hard for someone then to pick that up. Whereas if you just do some high-level steps in a checklist and then add the detail where needed, it's much easier to hand over. I'd say the other mistake, third biggest mistake I see, is people assuming that once they've done it, they just hand it over and it's done. And I'm yet to see a single process that I or anyone else has created where it's right first time. Like, it needs to be updated, and the best way to do that is to kind of walk it through with people. Because, I remember with a particular process that, in fact, that between you and me, like I think you developed the process, handed over to me, And then, of course, I'm following it through, and I think it was a time when you pass it to me, and we didn't have the time to, or we hadn't made the time to walk through it. And of course, I'd then start hitting barriers and questions and so on. And that's when you go, oh God, like the amount of additional time to then bounce back and forth with questions or to add that detail. Like you've got to just get down on a call. And it's not very long, like just get the person to walk through it so that you can see that they can do it without having to ask questions. Best case scenario, they go through it and go, yeah, this was fine. And you're able to be silent, handing it over. Normally, there'll be some questions. Normally, there'll be some changes that you make, and you can make them really quickly and then move on, and they can take it on from there.
Yeah, I can think of so many examples of that happening, and the times I've tried to shortcut that and skip that step and it's not worked out. And it's on the call, they start poking holes and go, Paddy, I don't have access to this website you're telling me to go into. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to have to set you up an account and that'll take me 5 minutes. I'll do it right now. Or the alternative of not having that call and after a few hours discovering that they've been blocked by this and then they've asked for access and then I've not been available for another day or something. And so something which was meant to be a quick return on the time invested instead kind of get blown out the water on day one and you massive face palm. So yeah, I can really right to that.
Sounds like you remember the specific example I'm referring to.
So many times. All right, something we said at the start of the episode, or in fact the title is to free up 15 hours. And every time I see this title, I'm like, that's a pretty big claim. Like 15 hours, assuming that people we're not talking about business owners who are working 100 hours a week. We're talking about 15 hours in a normal working 40-hour week being possible. The example that we gave, you started with was this kind of business owner who's spending 3 hours every day on sending a quote. And I know we've got our own examples, but is it really realistic for any business leader out there to aspire to free up 15 hours per week?
Yeah, it is, and for two big reasons. So the first reason is because if you look at your standard diary, so if you look at your calendar, let's say that if you practice good time management and time blocking, you'll be able to look back at your calendar and see where have you been spending your time over the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. If you haven't, then do that exercise retrospectively or from going forwards and really look at it. And typically you will see that there are some activities that you are doing on a regular basis which are lower value relative to everything else. And this is the crucial thing is I think sometimes when people think low value activities, they think, oh, you mean like admin and so on. And actually, it's relative. Like low value for me now is different to low value for me 3 years ago and 3 years before that and so on. For me now, the sorts of things that I might be looking at delegating and freeing up my time from might be managing members of staff. Now, a few years ago, that was one of the highest value, highest leverage things I could be doing was developing my people and focusing them on my biggest projects and so on. So it's like, that changes over time. So that's the first thing to say is like there will always be something relative in your schedule that is lower value than the other things. And therefore, if you can identify what that is and pass it to systemize it and pass it to someone else, then you will free up that time. And typically we've seen that, two days a week. So, like 15 hours a week is easy to identify. Sometimes, like with that business owner of the printing company, it's one process. Sometimes it's a few, but typically that you can carve out. But here's the second reason. When we think about freeing up time, we assume, I think all of us mentally assume that the maximum amount of time we could free up would be, say, 40 working hours a week or 60 potential working hours across 7 days or 24 hours times 7 for a week. That's actually not true. The potential time you can free up is essentially nearly infinite. Here, let me explain. So let's say that I free up 2 days a week because now I'm no longer doing quotes for customers. What do I now fill that time with? Well, maybe I'm going to start doing sales, more time for doing more sales. And then I realised, well, actually, now that I've got sales working really well and I've got so many coming through, I should probably be hiring a salesperson and passing them over. So now I need to free up 2 days of a week of my time from making the sales. So I pass that to a salesperson. So now I've saved 4 days. But then that 2 days will perhaps get filled up with me doing something more strategic, perhaps doing some marketing, setting up new marketing channels, managing Facebook ads, doing all those things. Once I've got that working, I can then hand that over. So now, I've got 6 days that I've saved up. And you can do that over and over and over. And ultimately, if you think about when your organization gets big and it gets to 7-figure revenue, 8-figure revenue, like beyond, that's ultimately what you're doing, is just increasing the leverage of your time, taking things that you have identified work for the business, a product, a sales process, a marketing channel, whatever, and getting it done by the people and maximum and leveraging your time. So it's actually possible to repeat that exercise of freeing up 15 hours per week over and over and over again.
That's awesome. And from a stress point of view, so we're thinking, we de-stress your business here. On the one hand, this model is like you're constantly going to find new things to take on. You're always going to be busy if you choose to fill up that time. But what changes, and this is from experience, is it's that feeling of growth. It's that feeling of not being stuck facing that same issue again and again. It's a feeling that you are not personally doing exactly what you were 6 months ago, and that you as a business and as a team and as employees within that team have grown and moved forward. And every time you free up time, you have that choice. If you are currently working 60 hours a week, then part of that freeing up time can be going on new activities, on new tasks that you take on, and part of it can be on getting your free time back and giving it back to your family and your health. So final question, Alexis, someone who's looking to get started with this. We've given some great tips. We've given a kind of a high-level strategy, but anything you'd recommend as a starting point, or any resources that they should check out?
Yeah, so because this is an area that's so important, and so we do. I am running a regular webinar that goes deeper into exactly how do you free up your time, and showing you in detail how to do it, and not just how do you free up your own personal time, but how do you set up your team so that they're managing themselves and able to build and grow your team without it taking up a load of your time. So I highly recommend people check out the webinar at airmanual.co/webinar. We've got other resources on the AirManual website, airmanual.co. If you then click on resources, you'll find other stuff there. And of course, follow us on social media, where we regularly are sharing tips. But also reach out to us, post comments, send us messages, share the specific things that you're stuck with, because typically we've got an answer for how to address it because we've been through it. And actually, when I think back to that business owner where they were, I remember they barely made it to the call with me. You imagine that, they nearly cancelled the call because they're so busy, and yet we ended up freeing up 15 hours a week. So that's the other thing to do, is arrange a call with a member of our team, because even if we don't end up working together, you don't end up using our tools and all these sorts of things, our number one core value is focus on impact. And so we will help you identify what's the big problem, what's the big opportunity that you should be addressing and tackling right now. And so we can help you get clear on that. So do arrange a call with one of our consultants. You can do that at airmanual.co, and then there's links on there to arrange a call with our team.
Awesome, both great tips. And my goodness, the number of times that we get the feedback from customers that just being held accountable and coming to some of those calls makes such a difference to getting started. I'll just recap on the webinar. So it's a weekly webinar every Wednesday at 1 p.m. So whenever you're listening to this, join us at Wednesday, 1 p.m. UK time. The details are at www.airmanual.co/webinar. That's www.airmanual.co/webinar. Now, in our next episode, we're going to be going even deeper on this, actually. We're going to be looking at the types of tasks that you could be delegating wherever you are in the business. So whether you're in HR or sales or marketing or engineering, we're going to take a look at what tasks could be delegated and typical rules that you can take for choosing which ones to start handing over. We will see you there.
Cool. And we're